IVM. You're listening to Remembering It Differently with Ramya and Rachel, the podcast about how India lived, how we spent, and how we were wooed as consumers since independence. We are your hosts, Ramya Ramamurthy, that's me, and Rachel Lopez.
That's me.
Listen in to find out how the brands we love and buy have survived, adapted, and thrived, and what it takes to ride out 75 years alongside modern India. So Rachel, thank you so much for co-hosting the show with me. I have known you long before we met because you are a journalist with Hindustan Times and I've read your byline. You have an amazing taxi top art project that has traveled the world. And you have the amazingly short but very memorable Wordy Wordpecker podcast with IVM.
And Ramya, I think I have known you in all my 7 lives, or 9, depending if I was a cat. I've seen clearly your bylines all over, business journalism and how well you've captured a changing India. I've looked at your books, Branded in History and Rebuild, how Indian brands overcame crisis and emerged stronger, better, wiser. And of course, your podcast with IVM, Feeding 10 Billion. Hello.
Hello.
So why 75 years of brands? Why this podcast? Relax. You're not in an existential nightmare. Both Ramya and I are history buffs, okay? And we realize we're in the midst of a landmark year, 75 years since 1947 this year. We wanted to do a show that documents the history of us as a country. But it's damn hard to adequately capture the way our lives were lived in an era that most of us weren't around for. So, of course, we can look at personal histories, photographs, read books, look at art or films from all those eras before to understand a little more about our lived histories. But
really, Rachel, nothing captures the fine print and the nitty-gritty and the raw texture, may I say, of our lived lives more than the stories we told ourselves. And really, if you look at it, what would be a better way to capture that than how we persuaded ourselves to consume products in an era where money was short, time was fleeting, and an entire nation and its industry and economy was basically being constructed from scratch by an all-Indian government for the first time. So, in other ways, what we bought, what we consumed, what we invested in shows us what we thought of ourselves, what was popular at the time, and what we really thought would endure. Otherwise, we would not be spending hard-earned money on it. And it's not just about the advertising and marketing per se, but it's more about the lives that these products touched and how they were changed by it.
exactly. I think if you want to look at what 75 years of India as a nation looks like, I say open your wallet, show me your credit card purchase history. Let's find out what we find scrimped and saved up all these years. Now, this episode we're looking at media and entertainment. So please expect some political upheaval, some noir, lots of plot twists, and finally, some nudity. Get ready, this is front page stuff.
How it started.
So we begin every episode, as you know, with a look at what was going on exactly in 1947, the year we became independent. And this time we're talking about media and entertainment. So what was happening when the tricolor was unfurling for the very first time? The good news, a lot was happening. And surprise, surprise, not all of it had much to do with freedom, actually. So we looked at, obviously, the headlines from August 15, 1947, right? The edition of Hindustan Times that was published in Delhi to figure out what was being advertised in a new nation. Rachel, are you ready to rewind?
Bring it on, Ramya.
So a lot of the products are ubiquitous in India's cupboards, and they were already crowd favorites even 75 years ago, right? These are not actually new names or products for us. Dettol antiseptic, Colgate toothpaste, ring a bell? Eno fruit salt, Glycodin cough syrup, Cipla remedies, Johnson's baby powder, Hamdard Safi, Kellogg's cornflakes, Lipton tea, all household names. And Brill Cream was advertising its greasy charms, Gillette was selling smooth shaves, Lifebuoy was telling consumers it would make them popular and land them jobs, and Palmolive was selling its exciting shampoo that would make hair sparkling, silky smooth, and easy to curl. And lovely women everywhere obviously still used Pond's. Lux had already roped in a film star, I think Leela Chitnis as its face.
Wow.
And Kodak was a prominent advertiser for its luminized lenses, as was Philips Radio, and Reynolds' Rocket Ball pen, which could go 15 years without a refill.
Wow.
Parle Gluco, which was shortened to Parle G. Parle was, of course, the biscuit maker of that time. And they wished consumers prosperity in this new year of freedom in an ad in a newspaper from then. And a rather bold ad pitches Colgate as the perfect toothpaste to fight bad breath so you can kiss your beau. which was rather sweet. So toothpaste wasn't like a necessity back then. I think a lot of Indian households still relied on like traditional charcoal, meswak, whatever to keep their tooth clean.
Yeah, but what you're really telling me is that you can airdrop me from 2022 back into 1947 and I would still recognize most of the things on the shelf, yeah, Ramya?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I know what the ads were like. What did the newspapers do? How did they cover 1947?
So a lot of the front pages of these various newspapers obviously show joy at becoming free. They're celebrating with us the fact that India is finally a free nation. Amrit Bazar Patrika, for instance, on August 15th, it was bold and dramatic. It ran a picture of Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian flag, and the new map of sovereign India. And there was a single headline in a large type announcing, "We bow to motherland." Below it was emblazoned, "Free." There were just nothing else, no other news items on the front page. So that was pretty emphatic, I thought. And other newspapers, particularly the ones based out of Punjab, focus on partition because that was the big news of the time, right? So the Civil and Military Gazette, which was based out of Punjab, dwells on the slaughter of innocent people in the wake of partition rather than focusing on the happiness and celebration of India's newfound freedom. Their lead story across 5 columns reports grim accounts of communal violence in the city of Lahore. But away from the border, the Hindu, which was printed from Chennai, is mostly ads on the front page from advertisers,
The Hindu had ads on the front page.
Exactly. Imagine the sacrilege. The India Electric Works, Victory Pencils, Standard General Insurance, Japco, Madhura Srinivas Mills, Sri Aurobindo Works, AVM Production, Columbia Records, as well as a film, which in Tamil would be Ayron Talaivangi Apurva Chintamani, which translates to Unique Chintamani Who Took 1,000 Lives. It was a fantasy adventure.
Cool.
And other movies that were advertised on Times of India, of all places, was It Happened in Brooklyn. And in Indian Express, there was an ad for the movie Miss Malini.
Wow. It was a good year for films, no? 1947, because I know around the time of independence, there was plenty of kind of cinema stuff happening. There were, 5 major production centers at least. There was Bombay, obviously. There was Calcutta, Madras, Lahore and Pune also had film studios. And I know that in 1947, in Bombay alone, 114 films were made and released. So pretty busy, man.
Yeah. And the films that released that year were also interesting. So Jagat Cinema was playing Surendra and Surayya's 1857, which was a retelling, of course, of our first war of Indian independence. But the highest grossing film of the year, Rachel, had nothing to do with independence and everything to do with love.
Wow.
Dilip Kumar stars in the film Jugnu. It was his first big hit. And it was Noor Jahan's last film before she moved to Pakistan. It even featured Mohammad Rafi in a cameo.
No way.
And it was controversial. Why? Not for depicting anything about,
no nudity.
Azadi or anything or nudity. No. Heavens no. It was controversial for depicting a college romance and for sparking Indian obsession with censorship because everybody said, is this what people go to college and do? Do they fall in love? We don't send our kids to college for this. And that became like the debate of the year. Surprisingly enough. And it made 50 lakh rupees then and over 10 million people saw it. And this is all basically data from ticket sales of that time.
10 million people, that's not bad, yeah? Given that India's population at the time was about 340 million. So 10 million of 340. And remember, you need access to go see cinema, you need money, etc. And I'd imagine that because it's not a book and because it's not a play, you don't need literacy to kind of follow it. And India was only 12% literate at the time. This must have been a pretty kind of good way to entertain yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not bad for a new nation. And I know that another kind of entertainment was more immediate, more intimate, and it had been going on for quite a long time, for almost more than 100 years. Across India, I know that theatres had plays in regional languages, which offered cheap but intelligent entertainment. In 1900, by 1900, that is almost half a century before independence, in Bombay at least, you can watch a play in English, in Marathi, in Urdu, in Gujarati and Konkani. That's pretty cosmopolitan.
Wow. Yeah.
And you don't have to be rich. It's not theatre because shawl compounds were venues for plays about workers' rights. There would be scenes about unfair working conditions. They were staged outside factories. Workers themselves were the performers. And that's pretty powerful stuff. I know that in Worli, in Mumbai that is, what was Bombay. In Worli, mill workers performed some 5,000 shows of Vastraharan in 1938-39.
And of course, Prithviraj Kapoor's travelling theatre troupe, Prithvi Theatres, was already 3 years old at this point. They opened with the classic tale Shakuntala, and their follow-up Diwar, which debuted at Bombay's Royal Opera House in 1945, was a massive hit. So that story about 2 brothers driven apart by hate, a wall separating their homes, it started as a play in Bombay's Royal Opera House. Obviously, it touched a chord with audiences as the threat of partition loomed. And another play, Pathan, about the frontier people being stereotyped as loan sharks or gatekeepers, ran for 600 shows.
600 shows, man. And hello. India means new brands to represent a new nation, right? I know that cool stuff was happening in the commercial space. I know India's first mascot, the very first one, was born just a year before independence. You know who I'm talking about, Ramya,
Yes,
of
of
course.
course, the Maharaja.
Yeah, so Bobby Kuka, who's the commercial director of Air India, and Umesh Rao, who was an artist with Hindustan Thompson Associates, now JWT, created the Maharaja, who we all know and love so much, for their print and outdoor ads. Bobby Kuka described him as an oriental potentate sitting on a magic carpet smoking a bubble hookah. I don't like that description. Surely we can do better. And you know what? Bobby Kuka does better because he says and describes him differently. He says, "We call him a Maharaja for want of a better description. But his blood isn't blue. He may look like royalty, but he isn't royal."
Oh,
And
wow.
what's really nice is that our first mascot is already, rich and the envy of the world and beautiful, but also inclusive. And that's not a bad note to start a new country on, a new career on.
And that first decade was pretty epic. I mean, the top grossing films of 1950s make this the era of romance, particularly Raj Kapoor and Nargis, right?
Arey
So you have
yaar.
Mother India, which is releasing, stamping ideas of strife and sacrifice into the Indian identity. And it also introduces like this good son, bad son dynamic. And guess what? She chooses India over her son.
Over the bad
And
son.
you had other movies like Avara, Aan, Shri 420, Naya Daur in this entire decade. And they've grossed all, less than 10 crores in their time. But adjusted for inflation today, it would be roughly 490, 650 crores. And Mother India would have made 1600 crores today.
No way.
And you can read about all these films in Filmfare magazine, of course, which starts publishing in 1952. It's the start of a glorious tradition of film journalism in India as well. And the first government under Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, which ignored entertainment except for
Really?
legislating. I mean, all they cared about was censorship, which they, sort of instituted in an act in 1952. They carry on the legacy of colonial British rules. So
Yaar.
they did, however, pass the Indian Copyright Act in 1957, ushering in the first modern IP regime.
Wow. Pandit Nehru really didn't like newspaper barons, didn't he?
No, I know it's really surprising because he referred to them as the jute press because, Birla, Goenka, Dalmia Jain, all these guys who owned the big newspapers of the time had begun, their fortunes had begun with jute. But despite imposing restrictions on newsprint, Nehru, in a famous cabinet resolution of 1956, which still prevails, banned the ownership of Indian publications by any foreign owner,
Wow.
which I thought was pretty prescient of him.
Yeah, very far reaching.
He also set up the 3 academies, Lalit Kala, Sangeet Natak and Sahitya, which are like the 3 pillars of sculpture in India, and they've sort of supported all the cultural work that happened in India in the early years of independence. He was also instrumental in expanding the All India Radio, which was
Arey
around
haan.
and since 1957 has been called Akashvani.
Say it with the voice. Yay, Akashvani.
Oh. And various media units like Publications Division, Song and Drama Division, Films Division, Children's Film Society, all these came up in 1950s.
How lovely.
And of course, the Film Institute and National School of Drama were also set up then.
So nice. Though he may have hated newspapers, but he really cared about culture. That first government really laid the groundwork quite well in the 50s, I think. This is also the decade when one very familiar character was born, Ramya. And you know him as well. We all know him because he still shows up every day and he still looks the same. 75 years and he hasn't aged. The Times of India cartoonist R.K. Lakshman started The Common Man as a comic in the 50s. He would go on to quite boldly react over the coming decades to all the news. He would be shocked at the headlines. And his shock was India's shock. He really represented us. He was common in the sense that he was the little guy's guy. And he was our reaction to the fact that we can't afford this. We can't dream this big, or we can't tolerate these scams and things like that. And to me, at least, he remained relevant till at least the 1990s. But by the time I think a new India, we'll come to it, of course. By the time India started to change and liberalization had set in, we no longer just needed to react and look shocked. We need to participate in our democracy. And I think for me, the common man didn't do enough of that. But until then, man, he was our champ. And he's so cute as well. I mean, if I met the common man, I'd give him such a big hug. I'd be like, oh, uncle, you've seen so much.
And for me, there's a direct line between the Maharaja and the common man, I feel, because they're both icons of India. But there's a
Yes.
certain level of detachment where they're able to observe or serve
Yes.
or even offer commentary in a way that, the royals or the truly common man would not have dared to, right? Like at
Absolutely.
that point, to criticize the government was radical. Of course, over the years, just criticizing or just being cynical or jaded was not enough and you needed more. But for that time, it felt very radical.
Yeah, and how interesting that the two people that represent India for Indians and for the world ends up being a Maharaja and a common man. So we have two sides of that spectrum.
Yeah.
So take us through the 60s, Ramya. What's happening?
So by the 60s, at least, cinema was entering a golden age. So if 50s had been about Bollywood expressing angst and aspiration of a newly independent India, and largely basically nation building as an exercise happening in all these sort of cultural sort of formats. 1960s is all about color, optimism, flamboyance. So you have Mughal Azam releasing in 1960. It
Arey
made
ha.
11 crores or 2,000 crores today.
Wow!
And it's got a lot of film critics basically point out to the 60s as the decade that epitomized by Shami Kapoor, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
the snow-clad Shimla, the bouffant sporting heroines, the emergence of a new modern India.
Oh, yeah.
And it's also the era of noirs because, you have filmmakers like Vijay Anand who directs these amazingly sort of Hitchcock-inspired noirs, Shakti Samanta's rom-coms with travel fueling them, and Nasir Hussein's frothy cappuccinos. The general mood of the 60s was light and breezy. And then not just Raj Kapoor, which was also Hindi cinema, but there was also Satyajit Ray, there was Ritvik Ghatak, there was Mrinal Sen, there was Girish Kasaravalli. So there was a lot of development happening in pockets of cinema across different regions, and the parallel began to emerge, right? So this Guru Dutt sort of suffering and his sort of art and his pain had, sort of left the room, and there was a very diverse, very interesting indie cinema that was taking its place. And there's a quote by Amit Khanna from his book in Open Magazine where he says, "Our studios were old, our recording rooms were outdated with little infrastructure for filmmaking. At the end of the 1960s, over 300 million people every year went to a theatre, often dilapidated, and laughed, cried, sang, and danced along." Which I felt was such a great quote for just how we were doing so much with so little and still managing to entertain a nation.
Yeah.
And that decade ends with movies like Aradhana, which basically marked the superstardom of Rajesh Khanna. And you can see a clear line, right? From Dilip Kumar,
Yeah.
who launched us in the 1947, to Rajesh Khanna, who has become like the iconic Hindi film hero for whom, female fans travel a great distance. They
Yeah.
faint.
And he's so
They sent him
swoony.
letters written in their blood or whatever. So that cult of the movie star had well and truly arrived.
Wow, what a fantastic time to be alive. Would you have written a blood-soaked letter to any star in any decade?
I don't think so.
Really?
I think the idea of a
She's
cult...
lying. She's
No, no, no,
lying,
the
listeners. She
idea-
just doesn't want to tell because it's so cringe now.
No. I think the idea of a cult, and no one does it better than South, right? We erect temples
Yes.
to every big, like Talaiva. Everyone has a
Rajinikanth
moniker.
has one, yeah.
Everyone has a little title to, sort of describe him. And there are temples for every one of those stars, right? So we know how to do cult, and we are very serious about cults. But I find the idea of like adoring someone just for a role they played on screen, like slightly bewildering. Like I could never get it.
How interesting, because I well and truly wanted to marry Luke Perry from Beverly Hills 90210 for most of my teens, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
I was quite sad.
Yeah.
So we clearly are on two different sides of this adoring audience debate. But 60s, I think, is so embodied by films, and so, cinema really comes into its own because the world sees the 60s and India in a different way, na? They see that the Beatles came to Rishikesh in 1968, yay. Like, it's like this high point. But really, India impacted them more than they impacted India. Because our big cities really did have a handful of bands, but not really a great music scene. I've been looking through archives to see what the bands would have been like since we're discussing entertainment. You want to hear their names, Ramya?
Yeah, of course.
60s bands? In Bombay, there was a band that played at Eros Cinema on the occasion of the release of Woodstock in 1969.
Ooh.
And they called themselves the Combustibles.
Oh, that's a good name.
Yeah. Calcutta, which had a lot of Anglo-Indians, and so they had a big music scene. They had a very big band. It had its own fan club. It had its own newsletter. And they called themselves the Cavaliers.
I like that name too.
I know. They're pretty cool. And in Madras, there was a band that did a lot of instrumental music, and they called themselves the Mustangs.
The Madras Mustangs.
The Madras
Oh.
Mustangs. So I think it's pretty cool, given that we come out of 12% literacy, we come out of Mother India and other things, but there's space for this sort of thing to, to thrive as well.
And this was a decade, let's not forget, in which the Amul girl made her debut, the Moppet, who would sort of sell butter to us for the decades to come. The Wills Made for Each Other tagline, which was used for a long time by the tobacco major, was started at this point. The Murphy Baby, another iconic
Of course,
emblem
I know the
of
Murphy Baby.
and Lifebuoy, all these advertising brands that sort of you think of as really coming up later, but their first like hit campaigns were minted in this decade, in the 60s. And it's a big contrast to what happened in the 70s, of course, where India's relationship with the media sort of got strained and redefined completely, right? Indira Gandhi was the one who sort of helped usher in TV in India, but she was also responsible for declaring emergency on midnight,
Tell us,
June
Ramya.
25th,
Tell us.
1975. What she did so that people wouldn't find out about it through the newspapers, which obviously print every day, she cut the electricity supply.
Wow.
So
to
no one-
newspaper companies.
To newspaper, obviously,
Offices.
offices, and they couldn't print the paper.
Shucks.
I think the only one that got out something the next day was either Hindustan Times, or I think one of the newspapers managed to get out, but
Wow.
no one else did. That news that the emergency had been declared was a blackout.
So you get up in the morning, think, kya ho raha hai bhai? And you can't tell in your own democracy, which is supposed to be for the people and by the people.
Yeah. And so between 75 to 77, those 2 years, you needed to have approval from the government in prior to publish any news. 327 journalists were jailed, not just journalists, but editors as well, including the RSS Jansang paper, Motherland's K.R. Malkani, whose arrest made it to the front page of Hindustan Times.
Finally,
So
something
that
got
was the
through.
only bit of emergency news that was allowed to pass because they didn't manage to cut the electricity supply in time.
Yeah.
And there was a chart apparently made by the government to determine which media was friendly and who was too critical. Does that
Yeah,
sound similar?
That just sounds like Santa's list from hell, man.
Yeah. And Indian Express, by the way, was placed in the continuously hostile category, for which I say kudos to them. And the Statesman was placed in the B category, which is otherwise hostile. Times of India, Hindustan Times, the Hindi newspaper Hindustan, Amrit Bazar Patrika Hindu are all placed in the A+ category, meaning positively friendly, which is a shock to me because I think of these newspapers as having had, a spine.
Yes.
And clearly they were very, very willing to pander to the government of that time. So this classification was meant to prop up the financial condition of the friendly papers.
Correct.
And government advertisements were basically discontinued in 290 newspapers.
Wow. What do you do without the government's handouts, man? I mean,
At that
it
point,
must have been
they're the
so
only
difficult.
advertiser.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But interestingly, it's also around this time that India Today gets published. I think it launches in 1975, just a couple of months before emergency is declared. And I was looking through old editions and old issues of the India Today. And one of the letters to the editor, Ramya, is commenting about the emergency. And it says, India, calm in an emergency, is better than an India which is on the rampage without one. So clearly someone is supporting the emergency and saying, couldn't the emergency be used as a slogan permanently? It's a good technique for stability. And I was like, what? Who on earth would think this is good for India? And then I read who written the letter, and it's someone called Madhuri Madan from Kent, England. Bhai, someone who had decamped, gone away from India, was enjoying a free press and a much more robust democracy in the UK, was kind of, in the style of NRIs many, many times since, was kind of taking the long view of India, saying, you stay subjugated, be happy because this is the stability you need. And I'm just like, wow.
But that's true, right? In India, when you often pose the question, would you rather have a fool rule you or a dictator? People always go for the dictator because they think ruling with an iron hand means better stability.
They just love discipline, even if it's for the wrong reasons. And this is a country that can't queue up, can't be on time. You can't deal with discipline if you had to voluntarily choose it. So what is this? This is like, oh, I prefer the strict teacher. No, you need a good teacher. And in the 1970s as well, another interesting magazine launches. So now Filmfare is this sweet, staid magazine. They block time and do appointments with actresses, take their children to Juhu Beach, take photographs of, happy families doing happy things together. But in 1971, Stardust magazine launches, and they are different from Filmfare, you guys. They have a different tone because they're doing gossip, they're doing the affairs, they're doing the backbiting, they're doing the bitching, they're doing the controversies. And in the Middle East and Africa, of course, Stardust is massively popular in India, okay? You can't wait for the month to start and for the new issue of Stardust to drop. Remember, there's no social media. There's no other way to get information about what XYZ star is doing, who said what to whom, who misinterpreted what and is now angry. There's no way to know, and you're dying to know what's happening. And you waited, and the magazines hot off the presses would kind of just sell like this. And in the Middle East and Africa, where there was a large population of Indians that were living abroad, and locals there who really loved Indian cinema, they would be hungry for Stardust. I know that a lot of copies would be smuggled out of India in the 70s and reach these locations, and each issue, Ramya, would sell. Each issue of Stardust would sell for 700 rupees in the 70s. Wow. That's how much people were hungry for this story of Indian entertainment. And of course, in the 70s, we give you the nudity you've all been waiting for. In 1974, Rusi Karanjia, who was the Blitz newspaper baron, as you know, he wanted to create buzz for their new magazine, Cine Blitz. And so he got a dancer, Pratima Bedi, who was married to Kabir Bedi, So he got Pratima Bedi to run around Mumbai's Juhu beach completely naked. And those photographs made it to the magazine. They made it to the cover. It was India's first, brush with this sort of what we now call bold entertainment. And of course,
India's
copies.
first streaker.
India's first streaker. Well, I'm sure there were streakers before, but India's first streaker that we have photographed. And copies sold out fantastically. And we all remember Cineblitz magazine, if for no other reason but for the fact that it was a Pratima Bedi moment.
Yeah, and there are so many films that these magazines then go on to talk about, right? In the 70s, you have Sholay that releases. It was made for 3 crores. It went over budget and it still made 35 crores at the time. But at that point, I remember when it came out, a lot of film critics were not impressed and they thought it wasn't going to do very well. And they were
Wait,
like,
one minute. A film critic in the 1970s goes sees Sholay for the first time and says, I don't think so.
And they're like, no, I don't think this is so great. I don't know what everyone's raving about. And it was actually a pretty tough shoot, because a lot of the iconic scenes took several retakes. For instance, Kitne aadmi the? That line, imagine how many retakes it took.
3 sarkar.
40.
Oh, shucks, no way.
And for me, the movie is Amjad Khan, right? He's the one that makes the movie for me. Jay and Viru's friendship is all great, but he's the iconic villain.
Of course.
And Gabbar Singh, apparently, not everybody wanted to cast Amjad as Gabbar Singh, and it took a lot of convincing to get him in the role. And eventually, he did manage to sort of impress. And apparently, it was based on an actual dacoit called Gabbar Singh in Gwalior, who would go around cutting off the noses and ears of policemen.
Oh, wow.
So fascinating. And it was, of course, the first Hindi film to be made on 70mm, the first film to be made with stereophonic sound. And it ran for 4 years, I think, non-stop and made such a huge impression. Its impression on Indian cinema is so outsized. And it was, just another film that came out that people thought wouldn't do very well.
I think for entertainment, you have a before Sholay period and an after Sholay period, because it's not just what you put onto the screen, but how do you show it? It's the 70mm experience. It's the fact that Jai, Viru, etc. are all larger than life and good triumphs over evil in this dramatic sense. Man, to be young and to be able to watch Sholay
for the first time.
For the first 20 or 30 times, which is what a lot of people did in the 70s. Yeah.
And of course, it was the start of a lot of careers. I mean, Dharmendra and Hema Malini, of course.
70s, yeah.
Yeah. And Amitabh Bachchan, sort of, his career took off after Sholay as well. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I know that his long legs climbed to the top of the Indian cinema industry in the 1970s. They would literally call him the one-man industry, because if it is not an Amitabh film, you had to ask so many questions. But if Amitabh and his 6 feet of Bachchangiri was in the film, you knew it would really do well. We don't say this enough, but Amitabh Bachchan in the 70s was a handsome man. I grew up much later. I did not see Amitabh Bachchan in the 70s, but I grew up wanting so badly that costume which lights up with little light bulbs. And I really wanted to sing Sara Zamana Hasino Ka Divana. So thank you, Amitabh Bachchan, for giving us that moment. Yeah. Tell us what the ads were like for the 1970s. What's happening when the big stars are dominating the cinema?
So there's a theme going on here, right? With your appreciation of the human body, because the little girl makes her debut this decade, frolicking under the waterfalls and
doing
getting
the la 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 la
la la la la la. And of course, that signature green soap and, the little freshness. And I think her name was Avril Nunes or something. And they found this model and they weren't sure if it was going to be okay, kosher to have this girl sort of prancing about. But that ad just took the entire industry by storm. And it just showed a very new way to focus on, sort of
the bath experience.
Exactly. Earlier, it was about just convincing Indians to use soap and have a bath, because we probably relied on homemade techniques to get fresh and get going. But this shows you the luxury of sort of
and the enjoyment of
and all that. And of course, there's also the famous gold spot ads with Rekha before she became Rekha of, the Umrao Jan. So there's a Rekha who's significantly darker, significantly plumper, but she's there.
What is she doing in these gold spot ads?
Gold Spot was, of course, at that point, I think Coca-Cola was not yet allowed. So we didn't have the Fantas and all that. But Gold Spot was the Fanta-like product.
Yeah. What are the ads?
She's just sort of in these ads. It was print ads. It was not TV. So it was just print ads where she's like, Gold Spot is my drink of choice.
Fantastic.
And I think it was her early years in Bollywood. So she doesn't look like the polished, refined Rekha of Umrao Jan that you remember. It's the slightly raw image of Rekha, but it's all the more memorable for it.
It's Rekha. I'll take Rekha any way you give her to me. She's fantastic. And I think for the 70s, it was all big films went big, stars went big, controversies went big. There were epic plays, all the national organizations, all of the stuff is happening that is big. And it continues, of course, in the 80s. But the 80s becomes the decade of the small screen, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The
this
revolution is
cool
literally
stuff.
televised, as they say.
Yeah.
The 1982 Asian Games happen. It's a big deal for India to host this in Delhi. There's a huge network of, sort of stadia and highways and living accommodation created. And TVs are imported. For the first time, you have TVs that are color, that are manufactured and sold so that we can watch these amazing games that are being held in India. And of course, it leads to the creation of an entire cottage industry around the fact that you now have a device which will allow people to broadcast straight to your homes.
Yeah.
So you have Doordarshan, the national broadcaster, that basically gets into soap operas, sitcoms, and epics. So you must remember like shows like Ye Jo Hai Zindagi
Of course.
and Bunyad. And of course, I remember all these stories about how people had a bath and got ready to watch Ramayana and Mahabharata
Yes.
on Sundays.
My neighbors did that. They
It
did.
was seen as, like the religious ritual of your day to actually sit and watch this on the show, on the soapbox. And we worship the TV set, right? It was basically draped in a doily and admired as this object they are.
Yes. Did you have a little wooden cabinet for your TV that went tat 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 when you opened it?
There was definitely like a prominent display unit for the TV, right? Earlier, the room was it centered on the dining table, and
Yes.
suddenly the switch happened where everyone was just looking in the same direction of the TV.
Yeah.
And it ushered in all these icons of advertising, right? You have Lalitaji from, you have the Nirma girl, you have the Bajaj light bulb, all these ads, and the owners envy, the
Neighbors envy,
owner's pride, the Onida devil, basically, Anchal Meri Luna.
Oh, yes.
Rasna, Vicks, Pan Parag. There were so many ads at this time that just basically, it's hard to capture just how much was happening. And a lot of it was also for the first time in a combination of Hindi and English, right?
Yeah.
It was like, Chal Meri Luna sounds like Chal Meri Dhanno. It's like a lot of things that were
I
happening.
love you, Rasna. It's so simple.
Yeah. And Sarf Kis Kharidari Mein Hi Samajhdari Hai. And all these ads, of course, like Ek Anek and the, sort of anthems reimagined by current musicians. There was a lot of emphasis on unity and diversity as portrayed by the Doordarshan ad spots. And perhaps now we might find them a little sort of naive and innocent, but they were so good at creating this sense of a united India, right?
Certainly. And I know lots of people who took them seriously. They believed in the idea of integration. We knew of a family who had 5 daughters, and their daughters were called Bela, Gulab, Juhi, Champa, and Chameli, which are literally the lyrics of the Ek Anek.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm so glad he had 5 daughters because those would have been very flowery names for boys. But imagine that these are where you're really taking your cues from. You're going to name your children after what you saw on television. That's the kind of impact it really had.
Yeah.
And 80s films, do we want to talk about, Ramya? 80s cinema.
Okay, 80s cinema is possibly responsible for massive levels of brain damage across a whole generation. The level of cringe, my God, like the so bad they're good films started here. So I can think of all those, Jitendra dancing in front of matkas with Sridevi, Himmatwala, Tofa, Mawali, and of course Nagin as well. The original Nagin, not the one on the TV now.
Yes.
And of course we have to talk about Disco Dancer and Chameli Ki Shadi and Jaane Bhi Do Yaro.
Yes.
These iconic films which were like these films that got made that were actually really subversive and really funny, but made with NFDC money or with Amrita Singh and Anil Kapoor. It's just like these little flashes of genius that happened just by happenstance. I can't believe they happened.
And they were only flashes because do we really have good cinema or like what?
No, there are some films that are so bad they make like the mediocre films look good, right? Like at that point, Tridev and Mr. India and Tezab and Ram Lakhan are considered like masterpieces because you have movies like Gunda and Diya or Darshan. There's a movie basically Gunda is a movie in which Mithun acts, in which all dialogues are basically, they all rhyme.
No way.
Mera naam hai Bulla, main rakhta hu khulla.
Please stop. Yeah, moving on to other things in the 80s. Let me just say, before we move forward, that Mr. India remains one of the best films India has produced, and that came out in the 80s. So it can't be all that bad. Did you cry when the little girl dies?
Yeah.
We all did. So hey. It wasn't so bad. The 80s also are, more nudity alert. What film comes out in 1985, Ramya, that makes 19 crore rupees for one specific reason?
Oh, Ram Teri Ganga Meri.
There's more of that promised nudity for you. There's also the launch of one big star who still remains young and youthful today.
Yeah, Maine Pyar Kiya launches in 1989 and it makes 28 crores and it launches the career of Salman Khan. We have Maine Pyar Kiya to blame for everything that came after.
We have Maine Pyar Kiya to blame for a generation of boys who would have been called Vijay but instead were called Prem. Okay.
Sure. And Tuffy the dog, who can forget?
The dog. Was that in Maine Pyar Kiya?
Wasn't it? Oh, that was Hum Ke Hai Kaun.
Don't
Sorry.
worry, it's coming up. It's coming
But
up.
there was a dog in Maine Pyar Kiya, no?
No, there was a pigeon.
Oh, there was a pigeon, right?
Come
right,
on,
right.
get your animals right.
And the film that released at the tail end of the 80s, that basically changed everything that was to come, of course. I preempted myself by talking about Tuffy. He was actually in Hum Aapke Hai Kaun. It came out in 1994, I think. And it made 175 crores. And I think it basically created this whole situation of, songs selling the movie, the songs releasing earlier and capturing our imaginations. Movie fashion suddenly seemed like something you had to sort of ape. I remember that purple sari that Madhuri wore was such a...
There were copies all over the place.
And just dancing, like she was obviously a great dancer and we'd seen that with Ek Do Teen even, but that movie really set the whole thing of like dance in Sangeet and all that coming from movies. I think that's when it started, that trend, right?
It certainly did. And I think between Maine Pyar Kiya and Hum Aapke Hai Kaun, you start to see the rise of this cloying, sweet, nice, sanskari family drama that the whole family goes for. But I think only the older generations enjoy far more than the younger kids. Because you're like, what on earth? I don't remember who the critic is, but I remember a review for Hum Aapke Hai Kaun that described the film as swimming through treacle. It's sweet, but it's so slow and you just can't trudge forward because of the gooey sweetness of it. And
I think it was another critic who mentioned that it was the first film that didn't have a villain because up till then it was always like a good versus bad guy, right? That dichotomy was very clear in cinema, but suddenly it was just...
Yeah, what on earth is happening? Everyone is just sort of dancing and dhiktanaing all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the thing that defines the 90s for cinema is not a particular film. There are lots of 90s films and we can do a 10-part podcast about them. But for me, the 1990s and cinema are defined by the film industry itself because India was producing, 800 films a year at this point, right? In 12 languages. It's worth 6,000 crore rupees. That's what the Indian cinema industry is. And for 2 decades, filmmakers, etc., producers were lobbying the government to recognize Indian cinema as a legitimate industry. That I found really odd. Like, what on earth is going on in the 80s and 90s that you have to convince the government that this is a legitimate, itna paisa hai, itna reach hai, and you have to still convince the government that this is a legitimate industry that needs to be taken seriously and formally. And by, I think, 1997 or 98, but somewhere in the late 1990s, I think it's 1998, the government finally grants industry status to Indian cinema. That's 85 years after we made the first film. 85 years after Raja Harishchandra, Indian cinema is legal. What does this mean? It means that you can pay taxes as an actor, as a filmmaker, etc. You no longer have to beg the underworld to fund your films. Stuff is and above in the open. You're not pretending you're a farmer or whatever it is. And that's, what the,
That's crazy that it took so long.
Yeah.
But of course, the 90s is also known for liberalization. And when India opens up and satellite TV is launched and the world is in your living room, from one national channel, we have, dozens of them. We have 1.2 million TV sets in 1992 and 14.2 million in 1996.
Wow, 14-fold increase.
And Onida, the devil, starts advertising for a second TV in the same home.
I remember that ad.
Which was unheard of the time.
I remember
and
that ad.
So this is a big barometer of this is like your where were you when this happened sort of moment in our generation, right? How old were you when MTV and Star TV came to India?
I think because I was in a very progressive household and English speaking, we couldn't wait. So I think we were the first group of people who got satellite connections. I know there were a whole bunch of conservative families who said, no, not until you finish your 10th standard, or no, bachchi ka exam hai, let's put the satellite TV off. But we weren't those people. We had it literally from
early
the first
on.
week onwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember I was in the 8th standard and we were one of the people who were like, nahi, boards ke baad lagega TV. So we had a TV, we didn't have satellite yet. Yeah. But I remember hearing the plot sort of
unfold.
Yeah, the summaries of, soaps like Dynasty and Bold and Beautiful and like all that was common gossip fare for the school bus or the the lunch break or whatever. And you had to have a favorite VJ, obviously.
Yes, of course I had a favorite VJ.
Who was it?
Danny McGill. My God, if you look at a young Danny McGill is a powerful thing, Ramya. I remember it was 1992 and I was in boarding school for only 1 year away from my family and things. And kids were crying because they missed family and they missed home food. And I was fine, because it was a new place and it's not a flex or anything, but I was okay. I wasn't missing anything until we would have this 1 day a week of television. We would all gather into the rec room and there was one tiny corner where a small TV screen was kept and you kind of squinted to see it. And I would see ads of the Crystal Maze and I would feel so homesick because I realized that, entertainment was going on without me. I was hungry actually for news, gossip, and entertainment more than I was hungry for family because I knew they loved me. It was fine. I was not being abandoned. But I was being abandoned by pop culture, damn it. And I was like, what is going on with Salman Khan? I knew he bit this Pakistani actress and they were like,
Somi Ali.
Somi Ali, that's
yeah.
right. He had bitten Somi Ali and I had sort of left the city and I was like, what happened to that?
I was
And
watching that.
I was watching that. I was following that story in midday. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's for me. If you really wanted a personal story, that's it.
Thank you for sharing, Rachel.
And I miss the ads as you so fondly remember them as well, Ramya.
Yeah, and the whole MTV tag, was it MTV which was "We are like this only," right?
Yeah.
That was such an amazing tagline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so perfect for India.
yeah.
So it was also the time of like really iconic advertising. Do you remember Hi, I'm Sanjana, Aishwarya Rai
Of course.
for Pepsi?
Of course. The world changed, man, when she asked for a Pepsi.
Exactly. And I remember there was a really famous Ericsson ad called One Black Coffee as well.
Yes, I remember that one.
And Fevicol did such amazing ads at the time. Cadbury, Raymond, and of course, one very infamous Tough Shoes.
Of course, more nudity, guys. Yay!
So Tough Shoes had the bright idea to cast Madhu Sapre and Milind Soman in a print ad, I think it was,
Yes.
where they're just sort of standing together nude and there's like a snake.
There's a
draped around
python
them.
wrapped around them.
And they're wearing these shoes. I don't think anyone remembered the brand, but that image went viral for all the wrong reasons, of course. And it was banned and there was some court case against it,
yeah.
which is par for the course when
And
you go
it
down
showed
that
you
road.
what you could and couldn't do in a new emerging India. Because
Yeah.
no one had a problem with Pratima Bedi, but they all had a problem with these two. And of course, I don't think the snake cared either way, but
The snake was not named as a respondent. And of course, the iconic tagline of the time, which was also then repeated during the Kargil War, was of course, Ye Dil Mange More, which became the first sort of tagline when Pepsi launched in 1998. And
yeah.
Rachel, do you have another personal story?
I do. Only an embarrassing one because I wasn't used to bilingual taglines and I was hearing them more than I was reading them, right? So everywhere it was on the radio and on the TV. Ye dil mange more, ye dil mange more. And in my head, I'm thinking it's all Hindi. And I'm thinking, heart wants peacock. Heart wants peacock. And I'm like, ye dil more kyun mang raha hai bhai? Like, what is going on? Until I realized, oh wait, the heart, it just wants more. So yeah, I was not very bright in the 1990s, sorry. I was actually watching a lot of the news, as were you, Ramya.
Yeah, it was the era of the Gulf War, and sort of you had broadcasters suddenly realize that there were a lot of eyeballs to grab, a lot of advertising rupee to sort of eat up. And
the news becomes entertainment almost, no?
News launches for the first time. So
Yeah.
where you have like a single broadcaster who's the public broadcaster, you have then a spurt of private broadcasters getting into the news space in partnerships with, like NDTV would partner with Star to create the news this week or all those sort of programs. And then they launched their own channel, of course. So everybody got into it. Star, Zee, Sony, ATN, Sun, BBC, CNN, they were all here. Independent production companies like UTV, NDTV, TV18, Nimbus, TV Today, Miditech, all these guys
I
started
remember
then.
those names, yeah.
Yeah, and the Z News launched in 1995. And of course, after the Gulf War, it was our own Kargil War in 1999, where you had like the whole war really became like the fuel for news channels to really get going. And I think there was a lot of blanket coverage of, like I remember Barkha Dutt reporting live.
Yeah, from those locations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that really set the tone for how 24-hour news would sort of take off in India.
Yeah.
So the 80s are, of course, a time of great advertising, but it's also the time when the Prasar Bharati, I think, releases all these amazing ads for national integration.
Yeah.
And I still remember the amazing rendition all these musicians did for Mile Sur Mera Tumhara.
Yes, I love Mile
And hearing all those iconic musicians each have just one line to contribute, and it all comes together at the end. And I remember when they have Lata Mangeshkar singing for all the Hindi film heroines, it's just like a rousing end to this amazing ad.
Yeah.
And
It
I think
also made me learn how to say Mile Sur Mera Tumhara, to Sur Bane Hamara in so many languages. माझ्या तुमच्या जुळता तारा मधुर सुरांच्या बरसतील धारा.
Oh, wow. Very well done. Yeah. I remember they tried to redo it later and it just didn't have the magic of the original.
I think you need to believe in national integration to make that work. It can't just be a gimmick, guys.
And of course, the late 80s is when we have the launch of one of the most remarkable careers in Bollywood.
It starts so small, doesn't it?
It starts on the small screen, actually. It's one of those remarkable stories of a crossover of an actor who went from starring in a TV serial and then became one of the biggest movie stars of our generation. I'm, of course, talking about Shah Rukh Khan, who made his debut in 4G. And to me, that is just one of the amazing discoveries of, like, he was just brilliant in that serial. And then, of course, he acted in movies like Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, Bazigar, Dar. And the breakout role, of course, was DDLJ, where he became like the nation's heartthrob and like Bollywood's boyfriend.
I think he stood on a hill, he stretched his arms out, and India just sort of hugged him back for the next couple of generations.
Yeah, and it's remarkable because this career started with a TV serial and then became like a anti-hero who did like slightly like nefarious things like stalking and killing off his girlfriends.
And you loved him still, huh?
And he was still popular and you still sort of wanted to watch him. And it's a remarkable thing, you know, stars' presence and charisma and how much that can sort of...
Yeah, and what a gem to have for Indian cinema and entertainment. Yeah.
Exactly. And 30 years of Shah Rukh now, this year, and it all started with 4G.
It's a nice point to sort of just stop and take a look at the years gone by and take a deep breath for what's to come, because we'll be discussing stuff from the year 2000 onwards just after this break.
How it's going.
This is the section of the show where we look at a more recent history. In this case, media and entertainment since the year 2000. You've been around for much of this. Maybe you were even paying attention. But as of 2018, India is the second largest newspaper market in the world with over 1 lakh publications and a combined circulation of over 240 million copies. We've got so many people who are interested in the news. We've got so many people and we've got so many people interested in the news. Everywhere almost in the world, newspapers seem to be shutting down, being absorbed into other sort of larger organizations. Local news, at least in the West, is floundering. But in India, we seem to have bucked this trend so far. And it's not just because we only want to read print or we want to read newspapers. We just want to consume everything. It's an and rather than an and or. And media is entertainment, isn't it, Ramya? From one national channel for 30 years, we have 800 channels, plus the streaming stuff, plus the stuff we can see through other sort of, through media. We have 24/7 TV at any point, any day. You can die of many things, but you will not die for want of being entertained in this country. We have lived through so much. We've lived through indie pop.
Viva, remember Channel V's attempt at creating
a girl band.
Band,
Yeah, I remember. And this large sort of search for it, and the 5 girls or 4 girls, I can't remember now. And they were all sort of singing and dancing together. And so we've lived through that. We've lived through Made in India. And we've seen its rise and rise and rise. We've seen that at one point, the top selling album in Kerala was one by Daler Mehendi, which I thought was a wonderful note for national integration. And indie pop brought that out. But we also saw it kind of flounder and die because it was just not lucrative enough. It was just not good enough after a while. All of the good stuff just ended up falling into, you know, the large behemoth, which is film music. Yeah. And through all of these years, from 2000 to today, without us realizing, we just all ended up switching to screens. So much of my entertainment comes through screens. And of course, through audio, because we have podcasts such as this one and so much free entertainment. It's not just cheap entertainment now. It's so long as you have cheap data and your phone, you can just never be bored. You need to know where to look. And I don't mean cat videos. I mean good stuff, good entertainment. I mean good IVM non-fiction podcasts. I mean great stuff to see on TV, to hear, to enjoy, to pause whenever you want and come back to, and to watch TV on your own terms. You don't need to buy the same ticket to Sholay 40 times, though you still can stream it 40 times. But you can watch 40 different things now.
That was a crazy decade.
Yeah. And I can scroll to infinity and sometimes still not see anything great. So there's a flip side to all of this. I can see Shraddha Kapoor walking to the gym, Ananya Pandey walking to a restaurant, Janhvi Kapoor walking to the airport. Thank you, Viral Bhayani, for creating a different kind of celebrity. What was that first decade, Ramya? The 2000s.
Incredible. And of course, it's also the decade in which we have IPL being formed, the battle for media rights for sporting events.
Yeah.
Other franchises are created, football, Kho-Kho, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kabaddi.
Yeah. All these other things are sort of given their share of the spotlight. There are billions of dollars spent on acquiring these rights. There's obviously creation of an entirely new audience. I remember when IPL was launched, it was seen as a dumbing down of a very respected tradition of cricket because the purists, of course, wanted to watch all 5 days and sit and see every ball by ball play happen. But for a lot of us who were not cricket diehards or
Yeah.
were rather cricket widows, so to speak, we would want something that was quick. You just had a 2.5 hour movie or a 2.5 hour match. You
Yeah.
just knew whom to cheer based on the colors of the
Yeah.
team. And then it was all sort of masala-fied.
Yeah.
But it made it accessible to a lot of people. Now, of course, purists will frown because that's what they do. But it made masala out of
Yeah.
cricket, which had not happened before.
And entertainment sort of just became all encompassing. Yes, I will turn sports into entertainment. I will turn news into entertainment. So the idea of everything becoming essentially an entertainment,
Yeah.
vehicle is really a post 2000s phenomena, isn't it?
And you mentioned 24-hour TV. I think it all happened basically. The spark that sort of lit the flame of 24-hour TV was 2006. Do you remember? There was a boy called Prince, a 4-year-old who fell into a 60-foot bore well in Haryana in a village. And the entire nation collectively held its breath as the poor boy was rescued. And we found out about every single development as it
Oh
happened.
my God. Yes, I remember. Breaking news. Prince ne biscuit khai. Prince ne biscuit khai. Because they sort of, sent down a snack for the little boy and there was a little camera and there was a 4-year-old boy sort of enjoying a snack deep down in the earth and the whole country sort of, it doesn't matter what else was happening. Policy decisions doesn't matter. Everything was on pause while Prince ne biscuit khai. And those were important news developments. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was also the start of like the ticker flashing breaking news, basically. There were also other, I remember we mentioned this, but where you had earlier your Chaya Geet and Binaka Geet Mala and all of those decades of curated music content were replaced by a music channel that basically streamed videos. And you had VJs like Gaurav host the Colossal Chaos Countdown. I don't know if you've ever seen this.
Oh, Ramya, you were so much cooler than me because this does not ring any bells.
So he basically hosted this show, which was a sort of curation of all the worst B-grade scenes and B-grade songs. Nothing was too trash for this guy. And it was brilliant. It was sublime because you could never find these movies usually, but you'd have like a snatch of a Ramsay Brothers horror film or some other B-grade films from somewhere, which basically now would be the stuff of memes. But before memes, there was Colossal Chaos Countdown.
Cool.
And of course, you had the Saas Bahu trope sort of leap onto our screens in this decade, and it never really left. The telenovela format, which sort of was adapted from the soap idea of soaps, which is basically
Latin America.
Yeah, the Latin American format was adapted for India, and we made it our own, right? Where it was the creation of a lot of new stories that were breaking new ground and allowing new kinds of characters to be featured in places like Brazil, places like in
the Chilean
parts
ones
of
as well, yeah.
Chile, yeah. Mexico had a lot of these amazing soaps, but in India it was all about the family unit, the patriarchy, the Saas and the Bahu, and various other concepts that are, in that domain, whether it was child remarriage, or widow remarriage, or child marriage, balika vadhu,
Oh, no.
or, even when they did do women in the workplace, it was in the context of
How a man would see a woman in the workplace.
or
clearly.
a woman in the workplace as a stepping stone to a marriage and another thing.
Hi.
So we didn't really see, we have women CEOs in India now. I don't see that reflected in our
Yeah.
television though.
They could have broken the mold.
Exactly. Where we could have been radical, we became regressive.
Yeah.
And we became like sort of catch-all for all the superstitions and all the beliefs, right? Like, for instance, I think our producer Jalasmi was mentioning how Nagin was one of the top-rated shows for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's nothing but a woman who turns into a snake
snake.
to avenge the death of her lover,
Yeah.
who's also a snake.
Yeah, but not the snake that wrapped itself around Milind Soman and Madhu Sapre in the Tufts shoes ad. It's a
No,
different snake, you
Not
guys.
that one, not that one.
I
the
just
other
wanted
one.
to bring a little nudity into all this sanskari stuff.
So, Rachel, was this the decade where you gave up on TV?
Yes, this is indeed the decade. I just stopped watching TV, and I think I'm not alone in that. There's no shame in realizing that this stuff just doesn't speak to you anymore. You had We Are Like This only in the previous decade, and I was like that only. But I am not this person. This entertainment did not speak to me, though it spoke to a vast majority of Indians who were first generation TV owners, satellite viewers, who didn't come from this bunyad, etc. backdrop. And for them, they were really connected to the regression. They really liked their own stories, their own insecurities, their own ideas of patriarchy played out on the screen over and over and over. So that would have really changed the way India kind of saw itself, because it's not just elite people sitting in their living rooms in the metros, but people in, Gwalior, etc., and all the other small towns that now become the focus of the storytelling. And for me, at least, the decade outside of television just had so much optimism. The early years of the 2000s is where we see the internet as a lovely, wonderful, path-breaking, inclusive, democratic thing, right? Because we have blogs. You have something to say, write your own blog. Don't wait for it to be published. You can have your own website as a business, as a person, as a group, as a whatever. You can have your say. There are comment sections where you can comment on the news. There are message boards. You can find your tribe. If you think you are someone who's interested only in red lipsticks, there are 15,000 people that are interested in red lipsticks around the world that you would never ever have found. So it was this great sort of lightning, bolt for all of us going, oh my goodness, this is who we are. And for us, it came hot on the heels of liberalization as well. So not only did the world open up, it opened up and we found a way to sort of connect to it in different ways. For me, that's what the early 2000s symbolized. I know lots of people were on Orkut, though I wasn't.
Oh God, remember Orkut?
Yeah, oh God, remember Orkut. And it was one of the most visited websites in India and Brazil in the year 2008. And then sort of everyone switched to Facebook once it opened up. I didn't for either of them, but I knew the heady sense of fun that you could connect with people. It wasn't the nightmare it is today, And there were internet cafes, of course. You could pay by the hour to download porn on a dial-up. Again, I didn't do this, but was, for someone who really wanted to access this. This was finally possible. And for me, that's how I remember the early 2000s. It's foolish and naive, but look how the next decade shaped up, yeah?
Yeah, it was the start of so many things. The revolution that was beginning to be televised would now be sort of broken down by Facebook sort of selling our data and telling you who to vote for.
Yeah.
And all that Cambridge Analytica stuff that happened. There was also the coining of terms for various groups of factions in news, right? There's the Lutyens
Of course.
media, the Godi media, and of course, urban nakshals.
Yes.
Various terms that have now become part of our lexicon. You had content creators make their break on
Andolan Jivi.
Andolan TV. And you had content creators from YouTube, Insta, TikTok, basically create their own platforms. You have people now who are, they're broadcasting their news from their living rooms and their studios.
And undisclosed locations sometimes.
And sometimes undisclosed locations. And they don't need a platform like a news channel anymore to tell you what's what, right? So you have stand-up comedians that are now our new sources of news. You have regional cinema that's being championed by everybody because they're managing to see it with subtitles on OTT platforms.
Yeah.
You have the rise of fact-checking as a job because of the rise
So
of
much
fake news.
misinformation, yeah.
So you have amazing outfits like Khabar Lahariya, which was the subject of a documentary that was nominated for the Oscars this year.
All women, all rural, all news, all cool.
And lower caste.
All
and,
lower caste. And such different fantastic narratives.
Yeah, so there's no more authority. It's all about narratives. It's about building your own fan base. It's about navigating that divide between the left and the right wing that we have in India now.
And not spending 700 rupees waiting for an issue of Stardust to tell you what's happening, but everything happening, breaking, sharing, liking, commenting.
Yeah, it's all instantaneous.
Distorting live.
And it's free because you are the subject whose data is being mined.
Yeah.
So as long as you're fine with that, it's all for the taking. Advertising has, of course, also seen a huge sort of pivot towards storytelling because it's, where we earlier said, oh, the 30-second ad is dead. Oh, the television ad is dead. Oh, the print ad is dead. All those iterations happen. And now you have long campaigns for various brands where you don't know what the ad is really trying to say, but it's a lovely story well told, right? Famously enough, Ching's did an ad for their secret sauce, which was launched in 2016 with a promotional budget of 75 crores.
For an ad?
For an ad campaign, which had Ranveer Singh in a series of situations promoting the sauce.
Ching's secret, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember this.
And it was obviously the budget of a small Hindi film. Not so small, rather. For me, he's really taking off where Amir had started in Coke, remember?
Yes.
The Thanda Matlab
Playing
Coca-Cola.
character.
He just sort of captured those characters so well. And Ranveer is truly his successor.
I remember Amir did one for Tata Sky, if I'm not mistaken, with like a half man on his right side and a woman on the right, on the other. So he just kept turning to the camera in different profiles, playing both the characters. And,
Wow.
and he was saying that Tata Sky, I hope that's the right brand because I can't remember it now. DVD Jesse Kamal, the picture quality, that sort of stuff. And I remember him bringing so much to commercial sort of language. And I'm
I
guessing-
remember the tagline for Tata Sky was Isko laga dala to live jhinga lala. And I was like, do better, guys.
So you're saying Ranveer and Alia are doing what Amir has done for
Oh yeah, Ranveer and
advertising?
Alia. There were a series of ads which just captured amazing chemistry. I remember in the late 2000s there was a series of ads that were done for Airtel, which had Madhavan and Vidya Balan,
Yes.
which were brilliant at capturing chemistry, right? And the next time I see something similar is with Ranveer and Alia for Make My Trip.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even use Make My Trip, but I just love those ads.
Yeah.
And they were just an example of storytelling done right, which would just capture, it's going to capture eyeballs no matter what you do.
That's true. And I think in terms of the last generation and how it's shaped up, I know when cable TV came in and satellite TV came in, everyone was like, oh my God, TV is so corrupting. They will upset our traditions and Western influences. I do not want my children to be Western influenced, blah, 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 blah. And we all sort of feared the West and the fears, of what global culture might do to Indian culture. And we were scared of the West so much. But the Koreans are like, hold my Yakult because I'm coming. And now we're all BTS and K-dramas and crash landing into you and eating ramen and knowing what byokpap and dyokpap or whatever those dishes are called. And we really didn't see the Eastern influence coming, yeah, Ramya? So
the onslaught happened from the East and we
Yeah,
didn't anticipate it. Yeah.
yeah.
But possibly we are closer and similar in our cultures and attitudes to Korea than we would have been to any
That's
sort of.
true. That's
But
true.
it's still fascinating to see like what has changed because we can now consume content anywhere, anytime,
Yeah.
in any language and in any format.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely been an exciting roller coaster for the entertainment industry.
And we don't know where it's going. We're going to have to rely on future historians to tell us whether we're actually living in an age where we should be happy. Is it going to get worse? Are we going to regret the things to come or are we regretting it already?
Yeah, I have these people who say this is the golden age and the best is gone and the worst is yet to come. I don't believe that. I think the best is always yet to come.
Oh, wow. How optimistic.
And we want to do a small little rendition of our this or that.
Yes.
But this time we're not doing this or that. We're doing actually, did it really happen on TV
Yeah.
version?
Yeah.
Where we give you completely fantastic situations and we have to guess whether it actually happened or it was just a figment of our imagination.
Ramya, are you ready for this or that?
I don't think I will be.
Did it happen or didn't it happen? All right. A woman starts to wash her husband's laptop as part of her daily duties.
It did happen.
Yes.
This was part of some clip that was going around.
Yeah. She sort of takes his laptop, disconnects it and takes it to the sink and, goes on with the Vim and the scrubber and say, how stupid do you have to be? I mean, as rural as a person is, you understand, what a
But
device is.
this was very similar to an ad I saw, which was, I think, from Europe, where a lady gifted her grandfather an iPad and he used it as a chopping board.
I love it. You can come back from, cutting your pyaz aloo on, but you can't come back from washing a laptop, man.
No.
Tell me, did it or did it not happen? Two men aim for the moon and break a part of it because they want to impress their lady love. And she says, mujhe chand nikal ke de do, mujhe chand de do. And one of them actually tries to break the moon by using some sort of laser. Another one literally drives up to the moon in his car. So fantastical. Did it happen or am I making it up?
It sounds like it might have happened.
Yes, it did. That's how ridiculous it is.
Where is this from?
Some silly, I have no idea what the name of this show is, but it really did happen.
Okay.
It really did happen. A woman trips into a suitcase by accident, manages to land into it in a comfortable, convenient fetal position. Someone doesn't realize, the suitcase closes, someone else zips it up, not realizing there's a human-sized weight in it, and sort of wheels it around the world. And when she unzips herself, she's not suffocating or anything, and wakes up in another country.
Wow.
Nahi hua tha na?
This sounds like could have happened. Again, I feel like anything could have happened.
Yes, because this did happen in a show called Ishme Mar Jawan.
Wow.
All right. This is your final destination moment for the small screen Indian shows. A woman strangles herself arbitrarily by a dupatta. She throws her dupatta across the shoulders only for it to get accidentally stuck in a nearby fan. And as those fan blades rotate, the dupatta gets stuck and starts to choke her. And then this guy doesn't know what to do and she doesn't know what to do and everything is in slow-mo. And did it happen or did it not happen?
It did. I've seen this film.
Correct. It happened in the show Swaran Ghar. All right. Did it or did it happen? COVID edition. A couple is moving in through an intimate scene. He gives her sanitizing gel and she sanitizes her hands. He gives her a pair of gloves and she puts them on. And very tenderly, as if he's putting a Mangal Sutra upon her, he gives her a face shield and she puts it on. And then they lean towards each other for a kiss. But he kisses her face shield instead and then sends her on her way. Did it or didn't happen?
Oh my God. I want to say it didn't just because I can't imagine such a scene, but
Yeah, it's clawing and painful to watch. I'd rather get COVID. Actually, no, I wouldn't. Yes, it certainly did happen in a show called Ye Rishta Kya Kehlata Hai.
oh God.
I'm so sorry that all of these things did happen. So I can't even create things that are fake.
So I have one for you. A lady goes to the temple one night and slips down and falls down the stone steps, leading to permanent brain damage. And as she's lying there on the steps with her brain basically spilt out on the floor, there's a renowned surgeon who happens to be nearby who scoops her brain up and transplants it into another person's body, basically ensuring that this person lives.
Okay, this sounds like a very bad fan fiction of a Danielle Steele novel. So I'm going to say no.
It did happen in a Mithun film. Only Mithun can make such movies happen. It's called Diya or Tufan.
No way, man.
Yeah.
That's not how brains work, listeners. Anyway, someone sort of slips and falls against a thali. The sindoor flies. Someone else's hand hits it. The sindoor flies again and lands on a woman's, the mang, the part in her hair. And the bells toll, and there are enough sort of markers of an actual Hindu wedding ritual for this to become a legitimate wedding. Could it have happened? Could you slip and end up married?
I have seen this clip. Yes, it did happen. And I was amazed at the laws of physics that were controverted to make it happen.
Oh dear God. Tell me, did it or did it not happen? A woman goes to the forest to collect some kind of medicine or some kind of herb, but upsets a holy man in that forest, and he gets really pissed off and he turns her into a fly.
What?
Sasural Simarka. That's
Good
literally
God.
what happens. Yeah, and so this poor girl is like a fly now. What is really sad is when you're a fly, you can't wear all your saris and your jewelry, which is such a terrible turn of events. And did it or did it not happen on a reality show? A starlet threatens to kill herself, to die by suicide on a reality show. And she makes all these threats and then turns around and scoffs and says, "In logon ke liye kaun suicide karega?" Rakhi Sawant in season 1 of Big Boss, guys.
Amazing. Wasn't there another one also where there were all these shows about dating, emotional atyachar or something?
Yeah,
and they had these
yeah.
iconic lines where she slaps the guy and then he starts crying and it becomes like this. What was this? Okay, I'm not getting the thing right.
Is this the Why Did She Slap move?
Yeah,
I think they
yeah.
clipped it out and it now lives on YouTube more than it actually lives because it was edited out of the show.
Okay.
But we all get to, which is a really interesting way to look at entertainment because what is canon and what is official and what was just filmed, right?
Mhm.
And I think she was supposed to have been triggering for the audience and happens to slap one of the participants and he
Yeah.
slaps her back as,
Yeah.
as one would in that situation. And then it becomes this huge thing. And of course, the optics of it are so terrible because how do you justify it? I don't think they had good enough PR to be able to hold on to any statement. And there is no good statement for a situation like this. So they just sort of edit it out as far as I remember.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But that's a nice note to sort of take stock of where we started, how far we've come, and all the little kind of segues along the way. That's where we're going to end this episode. You were listening to Remembering It Differently with Ramya and Rachel. If you liked what you heard, or wait a minute, you remember the last 75 years completely differently, then let us know. Reach out to me, Rachel, on Instagram. I'm at The Greater Bombay.
And you can find me, Ramya, on at Cryptic Caprice on Twitter and Dithering Funambulist on Instagram. Please don't ask. And if brands, consumer insights, money talk, and snippets of history are your jam, head on over to IVM's other podcast to listen in. See you next week.